Folks called him Willie. He was a dairy farmer, a tractor and farm machinery repairman, and a father of 11. I called him Grandpa. When he was a young man, his nation needed him for service in World War II, so he went. Grandpa served in the Pacific, and he's been gone for a few years now. So for today's project on the Woodsmith Shop, we're building a flag case to honor his service and his life.
Major funding for the Woodsmith Shop has been provided by Ola Masters, craftsman quality stains and finishes since 1953. Additional funding provided by
Titebond wood glues, the pro's advantage.
And by
Craig, from the first cut to the final assembly, providing woodworkers with products that help to simplify woodworking challenges. Craig.
And by
Powermatic, providing generations of woodworkers with tools and machinery to create and inspire since 1921. Powermatic, the gold standard.
You know, Chris, as a finished project, this flag case definitely has a lot of personal value going on it, but there's a lot of woodworking in it too.
There is. Lots of angles, lots of challenges. There's actually 3 parts to this project. There's the flag case, there's a lid, which offers a place for memorabilia, and there's a stand, which it sits proudly on.
So you can build something that'll sit on a bookcase or a mantle with just the case or the lid, or turn it into its own freestanding piece.
Yes.
What I like about it is the classic styling that we have going on here that has the rich mahogany color, a little bit of brass work, and there's even a raised panel on the top just to add to it.
You'll find plans for this project at woodsmithshop.com.
Now, of course, the place to start on building a project like this is with the main flag case itself, and that's where we'll join Logan in the shop.
We're going to start our flag case off by building the box that actually is going to house the flag. Now, we're all used to building 90-degree projects and using 90-degree joinery, or in my case, 90-degree-ish. But the triangle flag case has its own set of problems. Let me go ahead and show you those. Now, I've cut these parts to length, but left them a little wide. That's going to allow me to get both the top and the bottom cut at the same time. The top fill we'll use later to create the top of the box. So it can give us nice continuous grain, and all of our angles are going to match. Now, the sides of the box meet up at a 90-degree angle. Now, that's easy to cut using a couple 45-degree miters. However, when we bring the back of the box in, that has its own set of challenges. The side and the back create a 45-degree angle, which is going to require us to cut 22.5 degrees on both the side and the back to make that angle. Now, you can't cut that on a table saw. The blade just won't tilt far enough. So what we need is a jig to hold the workpiece vertically so we can cut those. I have that here, so let me go ahead and show you how that works. Now, as you can see, the jig is simply plywood, and it straddles the rip fence. There's a vertical support that is going to back up my piece, and then I'm going to be able to clamp my piece to the jig. Then, once my angle of my blade is set, I can go ahead and push the entire jig with the workpiece attached, cut the miters. Now, speaking about the angle of the blade, 22.5 degrees is a pretty exact angle. If you're a couple degrees off that, you're going to have a joint that doesn't look very good. So that's where I like to rely on one of these digital angle gauges. I can zero it on the blade while it's at 90 degrees, and then just tilt the blade until it outreads 22.5. Then I lock everything tight and make my cut. Now, as you can see, using a jig to hold the workpieces vertically makes cutting those miters nice and simple. After I had the miters cut, I went ahead and separated what's going to be the top and the bottom of the case. And then I cut everything to width. Then, using a dado blade buried in an auxiliary rip fence, I went ahead and cut a rabbet in the top and bottom edge of the case pieces. These will receive a piece of glass and the bottom later, and those will be installed with a piece of brass. After those were cut, we're ready to go ahead and assemble everything. Now, clamping a triangle up is not a real easy task. So this is a perfect application for either a band clamp or pieces of tape like I have here. put that on the outside of each joint, and then that acts like a hinge. So after I've applied glue to the insides of the miters, I can fold the case pieces up and use the tape to hold everything together while it dries. Now I'm also going to shoot a couple pin nails in here so we can keep the assembly process moving along. I'm going to make sure to avoid the areas where we're going to put the splines in later. So I'm going to go ahead and get some glue applied here, and then we'll head over to the table saw to cut the curves for the splines. I like to apply glue to both sides of the miters just to make sure I have even glue coverage. Because a miter is not a terribly strong glue joint just because it's a lot of end grain, so any extra glue you can get in there will help. Now I'm going to go ahead and fold the 45-degree angle first, making sure that's nice and tight because that is on the front of the case. So any little bit of movement we need to have will be on those back two joints that are towards the rear of the case. Now when I shoot these nails in, I'm going to make sure I'm shooting in the direction of the piece I'm nailing into. That way they don't blow out the edges and come out the side. Now that our case is glued together and there's pins holding it together while the glue dries, we can go ahead and cut a couple kerfs for some splines. Like I mentioned earlier, a mitered glue joint does not offer a lot of strength. It's mainly end grain and there's not a lot of purchase there, so it's a pretty weak joint. So by cutting some kerfs for some splines, it's going to add a little bit of face grain into that joint, and it's going to be nice and strong. Plus, they look pretty good too. To cut the kerfs for the splines, I'm going to go ahead and use the jig that's outlined in the plans. I've added a pair of fences that allow me to put the case in and register one side, make the cut. Then I can slide it to the opposite fence and make the second kerf. Once I've cut the kerfs all the way around, I can line up the center kerf and make that cut. Now, one quick note about the blade I'm using. This is a flat tooth grind blade. That's going to give us a nice flat bottom kerf that our splines will sit into. That way there's no gaps. Once I have all the kerfs cut, the splines can simply be glued into place and then sanded flush.
The process for making a matching lid to go with the flag case that Logan put together is actually pretty much the same. So rather than bore you with a rehash of all of those steps, what I thought I'd do instead is highlight some of the differences and the details that make the flag case lid a little bit different. Now, the lid itself, other than protecting the flag case, serves as a display area as well. So one of the things you'll need to do, like the case, is cut a rabbet on the lower edge of the pieces to house the glass panel. At the top, you'll round over that upper edge and then cut a groove in it that will hold a solid wood panel. Now, what you'll do is take the lid pieces and assemble them with some tape and without glue, and that'll give you the overall size of what you need for the lid panel. The panel itself starts off as a glued up blank, then you'll cut it to size over at the table saw. With a pair of layout lines, I use the miter gauge and a long auxiliary fence attached to it to guide the workpiece to make those two cuts. A flat, solid wood panel would do just fine for this project, but considering how special it is, I wanted to give its appearance just a little bit of a boost. So what we did is added a raised panel detail to the lid. What's nice is that you can create this with just two simple steps, one at the router table and the other over at the table saw. At the router table, I used a core box bit to create the rounded shoulder profile. This is just a matter of making a pass along each of the three edges of the lid panel. Then you'll head over to the table saw to remove most of the waste. You do that by tilting the blade. Now I used the digital angle gauge to dial in the angle of the blade tilt, just like Logan did earlier. I also used a tall auxiliary fence to help support the lid panel as I was making a cut, again along each of the three edges. What's important here is that you get a nice seamless transition from the bevel to the rounded shoulder. Now, more than likely, the table saw is going to leave some blade marks on the lid panel, but with a sanding block, you can remove those blade marks and blend the transition between those two profiles so that it's seamless. Once everything is to your liking, you can take the lid panel, the three frame pieces, and glue them all together. Then don't forget to add the splines. The open lid of the flag case makes a great display space for service awards, medals, and patches. But we want to fill that with a little bit of a cushion. So we're going to step away from the woodworking and go into a little bit of upholstery work, sorta. Now, the cushion that we're going to put inside here is made up of 2 layers of foam core board. Now, this is the kind of stuff that you can find in just about any hobby store. I attach the layers together with some double-sided tape, of course, and then you can cut it pretty easily with a utility knife and a straight edge. But the key thing here, though, is you want a pretty close fit for being able to drop into the opening of the lid. There could be a little bit of room on the outside, because once you wrap it, it'll be a nice snug fit, and that's what's important. Now, believe it or not, when we wanted to get some nice straight edges on here, we passed it over a power joiner. Worked just fine. On top of that foam core, I'm going to put a couple of layers of cotton batting just to provide a little cushion and give to it. The final piece of the puzzle is a layer of velvet that you can pin the patches and medals to. Now what you need to do is be able to secure this all together. I'm going to flip this all over. And you can see how I'm going to attach the pieces together. I've put down some long strips of double-sided tape. I can peel the backing off of them. Then what I'll do is pull the velvet over and stick it down on the double-sided tape. Now, to get it pretty snug, you want to make sure that all of your layers are centered on each other. And then I'm going to start in the middle, pull it over, and press it down onto the tape. And I can do that all the way down the line, keeping it pretty snug on the edges. Then I'll just go to the next edge. And then the final one. What you're left with is some excess material in the corners, but you can just trim that away. Since this whole thing is going to get slipped into the lid, it doesn't have to be exact, so you don't have to feel like you need to get it perfect. Okay. Now I can take that, fit that into place, tuck in my corners here. And there you have a nice display area. Later on, we're going to cover that up with a glass panel and secure it with some brass strips. From upholstery, it's time to move to metalworking. The inside surfaces of the lid and the case, as well as the lower edge of the case, are all trimmed in brass strips, just to add another formal touch to this project. Now, the real trick here is cutting the brass strips so that you have the same tight miter joints as you do on the case pieces. Now, the brass just starts off as long strips, and normally I would cut those using a hacksaw. But in order to get the tight joints, I decided to use the same jig that we used for cutting the 22.5-degree miters on the case pieces. It's all done over at the table saw. You use the joint to cut not only the 45-degree miter where the two sides meet, but also these 22.5-degree miters where the sides and the back strips meet. The brass is soft enough so you can easily cut it at the table saw. Then it's just a matter of going to the drill press and drilling some countersunk screw holes to attach them. One of the tricks with working with brass is installing brass screws. Now you can see that the screws themselves are pretty small. To get those little guys driven in without snapping them off, it's a good idea to drill some pilot holes using a self-centering bit with a drill. Then you'll be able to make sure that the holes go in straight and are the right size. Then I'd recommend putting a little bit of wax on the screw and driving it with a hand screwdriver so you don't break it. Once you have that taken care of, there's one other thing that I want to mention. If you are building the lid that goes with the case, you'll need to join those two pieces with some hinges. Now, ordinarily, hinges like these would get mortised into the wood pieces, but the hinge leaf and the strips are the same thickness. So all you need to do is cut a notch in the back strip of both of those pieces, and you can do that at the table saw. The plans show you all how to do it. Once that's taken care of, it's time to go back to the woodworking and make a stand.
Well, now that you've finished the flag case, here's a project you may want to consider, and it's a stand for the flag case. It's a pretty simple project, really. I have here some dry-fitted parts, legs and rails, which form the balance of the stand. Also, there's a small capping strip which will run across the top edge, and that will hold and center the case onto the stand. Now, this is a pretty straightforward project, but there are some angles involved. That's okay. Woodworkers love angles. So let me show you what's going on. Now, as you can see, our front leg is square in cross-section, and all the legs start out this way. The two back legs, however, end up triangular. If you look at these two rails, these side rails, they intersect this front leg at 90 degrees, and that means the layout and the creation of the mortise and tenon joinery is very straightforward. You're all familiar with that. The intersection of these side rails into this inside face of our back legs, once again, is at 90 degrees. No big deal. The challenge comes in this back rail. You see it intersects at 45 degrees to these inside faces. And that would mean laying out a mortise on an angled surface and cutting that angled mortise. It would also mean creating angled shoulders on our tenons. So that might be a little tricky. So if you don't like the game, change the rules. What we've done is to cut a notch on the edge of each of these back legs. And that notch allows us to come in at 90 degrees for our mortise and tenon joinery. So we're going to cut these rear mortise and tenons the same as all of the others, and it simplifies construction considerably. So I wanted to point that out so you know what we're going to be doing when we go to create all these different parts. And so with that said, let's start laying out and cutting our front leg. Before going over to the drill press to drill out the mortises, I'm going to stop here at the table saw and cut the notches on the two back legs. It's time to start drilling mortises, and I'm going to begin with the front leg. I have a 3/8 Forstner bit in the drill press, and I'm going to drill 13/16 deep. It's important to remember that the two back legs are mirror images of each other, so take your time, double check, and make sure you have your mortises laid out correctly. The next step in our back legs is going to be to cut the mortise in which the side rail fits, and that's what I'm going to do now. In order to hold the leg in the correct position for drilling the mortise, I'm using the same carrier board that I used in cutting that face on the table saw. To cut the tenons on the side rails, I've installed a dado head in my table saw, and I also have a sacrificial fence in place. I've cut my two faces, one shoulder, and now I'm going to cut the lower shoulder on the tenon. In order to make the long, angled rip cut necessary to complete our two back legs, it's a good idea to double-side tape each blank to a carrier board. Now that's going to give us more control and therefore more safety. Well, it's time for the fun part of this project, and that's the glue up. I've selected a slow-setting hide glue so I don't have to panic when I'm gluing this up. I'm going to dispense a little bit here, and I'm going to start the glue up by gluing the back rail to my back legs. With the back rail and the two legs glued together, I'm now going to move on to my side rails. Now, being a three-sided object, there's really no good order of assembly here. So after I get my other rail in place, I'm going to lift it up and I'm going to flex things a little bit to pop in our front leg. Well, it's the last step of the glue up, adding the front leg. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some glue into these mortises on the front leg. I'm going to set that aside now and apply glue to the tenons of these side rails. With that completed, I'm now going to pick up this frame upright, take my front leg, and I'm going to have to work it in a little bit and flex things. And that's just an issue that you run into with a three-sided project like this. Little persuasion. That's good. All right, now it's time to add a band clamp to this project, and we'll pull things together a little bit. When applying the clamp, it's important not to put too much pressure. Otherwise, we're going to crush some of these delicate edges on our legs. We also want to make sure that the band clamp is centered on our joinery. If we don't center it, it may cause the legs to splay in or out a little bit. Check to make sure everything's pulled together. Looks like it has. The last step I want to do is take a measuring tape, and I want to measure from corner to corner of my legs and make sure that things have not splayed out. With the glue drying, this is our one and only chance to make sure the legs are all exactly parallel with each other. Well, things look pretty good. So I'm going to let the glue dry. Once the glue is dried, the next step is going to be to add this cap rail that I've cut at the table saw. And when that is rimmed around the top of the stand, it's going to hold our flag case in place. I've taken the band clamp off of our flag case stand. I've also added this trim strip around the outside. And we created that trim strip on the table saw earlier, if you remember. When fitting these long miters, be patient, use a sharp hand plane, and it'll go together well. Now, if you'll notice on our trim strip, there is this raised lip around the inside edge. That raised lip engages the bottom of our flag case, and it's going to keep it securely in place. Like so. So with that, we're finished with our flag case and our stand. So that leaves sanding, a stain, and a clear finish.
If you're like me, after several months of working in your shop, you have a tendency to accumulate lots of little pieces of hardware after you finish your project constructions. Mark Cahill from Auburn, New York, also had a similar situation. But one day while he was taking some of his prescription meds, he discovered that he was accumulating a lot of pill bottles. He came up with this nifty idea here for storing your hardware utilizing those leftover pill bottles from his prescriptions. It's a simple case construction utilizing tongue and groove joinery on all four corners using half-inch Baltic birch. The base is also half-inch Baltic birch, slightly oversized to add stability, with a simple metal handle that is screwed to the top. The shelves are made from plywood and have holes drilled in them to accept the size of the pill bottle that you may have. Once you have it all assembled using dowels on each end with simple toy wheels for handles on the outside, now I can organize all of my loose hardware into the pill bottles by placing them in, securing the top. I can turn out the shelf to expose the hole, drop the pill bottle in, and voila, I have a handy organizer for all of my loose hardware that I can pick up and place anywhere in my shop.
Back in college, my brother and 3 friends packed up for a spring break trip to Washington, D.C. A highlight of the trip was visiting all the monuments and memorials to famous people and unknowns. Whether you get to our nation's capital to see those or not, making a flag case like this creates a permanent memorial to someone that you may love. If you'd like free plans for this project and others, it's all at our website, woodsmithshop.com. If you'd like to get more video tips and techniques, sign up for the free weekly Woodsmith e-tip. Every week, you'll receive an email with a video tip to get more out of your table saw, router table, and more. Sign up at woodsmithshop.com. Everything in today's show comes from the newly expanded Woodsmith Guild Edition with shop projects, plans, tips, and techniques. To get a free preview issue of the Woodsmith Guild Edition and a free Woodsmith book, go to woodsmithshop.com. In addition, past seasons of the Woodsmith Shop are available on DVD, or you can watch them online from your computer, tablet, or mobile device. For more information, go to woodsmithshop.com.
Major funding for the Woodsmith Shop has been provided by Ola Masters, craftsman quality stains and finishes since 1953. Additional funding provided by
Titebond wood glues, the pro's advantage.
And by
Craig, from the first cut to the final assembly, providing woodworkers with products that help to simplify woodworking challenges. Craig.
And by
Powermatic, providing generations of woodworkers with tools and machinery to create and inspire since 1921. Powermatic, the gold standard.